Okay, welcome to our final chapter. We're going to be talking about social behavior today. So I want to start off by saying that this is a more concise lecture than even normal. Um, there is a lot in your book that we do not cover in this lecture for various reasons, lots and lots of reasons for that. But it's all in your book very clearly. So you should definitely make sure that you read the chapter or you're going to be at a disadvantage for the quiz and for the exam. So first, what is social psychology? It's the discipline that really looks into explaining how our thoughts and feelings of behaviors are influenced by those around us. That's all, but it's a huge field. So we're going to talk first about attitudes, persuasion, and cognitive dissonance. Don't worry, we'll explain what that is. So attitudes are evaluations. They can be good, they can be bad, but that's all they are. They're evaluations. And there's kind of two ways to end up with attitudes, exposure and conditioning. The exposure effect, very, very simple. The more you're around it, the more positively you view it. So here the picture is my daughter with my horse. She's around my horse a lot. So just by dint of being around him, she's enthusiastic about horses, right? But then conditioning comes into it. So the more an activity is reinforced, the more you'll feel positively about it. And like they're related, obviously. So exposure is less active, whereas conditioning is active. So for example, if I say, if you want to go to the playground, then we'll just go to the playground. But if you want to go to the barn and ride, I'll get you ice cream afterwards, right? So that would be conditioning through reinforcement. So obviously there's another kind of conditioning. And when you have a neutral stimulus, right, and you pair it with an emotionally salient stimulus, you will develop associations. So the image that I picked here is from Slate. The most obvious example is about race and about how you view race and diversity. So we'll talk about this more later, but when you can have that go either way, right? So when you are in a social context that promotes tolerance, then you will grow up feeling more tolerant. If you are in a social context that promotes hate, the opposite is true. I think that probably makes sense. Okay, so cognitive persuasion. So persuasion is really about how to change the attitudes of others. And there are two ways to do this. There's central root processing. So this happens when we're able to think really clearly and calmly and analyze information from sources and all of that. And peripheral root processing is when we're not able to do that, when we are only attending to the cues that are kind of on the surface level, that are accessible to our kind of current um, emotional state. So I have here this picture of the front of Oprah's daily magazine, I guess, for her favorite things. And I want to ask you, so is this, if you are going, ooh, I'm just going to do all my shopping from Oprah's favorite things, is that central or peripheral processing? And I would submit to you that for the most part, that is peripheral root processing. And I say that because, if you are not even considering the details of what is on the list, then you're just looking at who's recommending, oh, Oprah is credible to me, and that's it, then you're in a peripheral state. However, that being said, there are going to be some instances where you have lots of experience with Oprah's favorite things, right? So you've looked at Oprah's favorite things from 2023 and 2022 and 2021 and bought from that list many times before and had it go really well for you. So if that's the case, then actually it might be a central root processing situation because you are thinking critically about what you're doing, what choices that you're making, and what you choose to be persuaded by. So it can depend a little bit on context. Okay, so a little bit of practice here. This is just the same text from the last slide. And here's some ways that you can practice. So if you are consulting multiple experts before you make a decision about vaccines versus taking the opinion of people on TikTok. Okay, so which one of those is central and which one of them is peripheral? The teal one is peripheral. The consulting, or I'm I'm so sorry. The purple one is peripheral. That's the one where you're not really paying attention. You're just, listening to a source with very little evidence, right? So the next example is buying a product based on packaging versus comparing product labels, prices, reviews, taking a lot of information and data into account. So the comparison, the orange here is your central root processing, okay? And then the last one is voting straight party ticket versus consulting the voter's guide about individual candidates. You could have also put here, doing research on their voting history, that sort of thing. This is a really classic example of peripheral root processing when you vote the straight party ticket. Because you don't really know anything about those folks. You just all you know really is their party affiliation, and that can represent a really broad range of behavior, right? And some of it you might support and some of it you might not. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is the feeling that we have when our actions really don't reflect our beliefs or attitudes. So when this happens, usually we change our beliefs, not our behavior. Or we refuse to examine the behavior, or we find a way to justify it. So an example, right? So, oh, by the way, so when we justify behavior that does not conform to our stated beliefs, there's a defense mechanism for this. If you remember what that's called, it's called rationalization. Basically, you get to make excuses. So here's one excuse. I didn't vote because I was busy. One vote doesn't change elections anyway. Here's another one. Amazon is terrible, but it's cheap and I don't make much money. They're working on improving things. It's a process I want to support. So those are all rationalizations, right? So um, we have a tendency not to change our behavior very often. We're much more likely to kind of do mental backflips to allow us to continue doing whatever it was that we were doing before. If you're interested in kind of how this affects us as consumers, I would recommend this thing on Netflix called Buy Now, The Shopping Conspiracy. It's mostly about Amazon, actually, speaking of Amazon. And it really does talk a lot, not explicitly about this particular thing, but how the industry works really hard to avoid um, the knowledge of the consumer getting in the way of them buying more things. So it's really interesting and works really well with this concept. Okay, so we're just going to talk about bystander intervention, just like the teeniest, tiniest bit, but I do want to point out that there's a lot of information on helping behavior in your book, not just about this. And it's really interesting. It goes into gender differences. It goes into, um, well, all sorts of things. And so I definitely recommend that you read that carefully. Okay, so a bystander intervention. There was an incident in the 70s where a woman essentially was murdered with many, many people around her that could have intervened and didn't. And this led to an exploration of what causes people to not help when there is somebody who really needs help. And the result of that research was essentially that um, the when you need help, you need to understand that bystanders are only going to help you under certain conditions, right? If you've ever taken a CPR class, you understand that you will recall that part of doing AED stuff, so the shock for the heart, is that you have to say to somebody, go get the IED, right? If you don't say it to somebody in particular, then you're kind of out of the script that you're supposed to be in, and this is where it comes from, right? Also, when you're doing CPR, you're supposed to point to somebody specifically and say, call 911, right? Same thing. That's step two, right? You need to say like, well, sorry, that was step three. You need to make sure that you're saying what you need instead of just screaming. Okay, screaming surprisingly does not work. You can be in trouble and scream all day long, and maybe nobody will help you. That was what happened to Kitty. But if you say like I need help, and then you point to somebody in particular and you say, help me, and then you give them instructions, then your chances of getting help are much, much higher. If you're on the other side of this and the person who needs help does not know how to do this or doesn't, isn't able to do it because they're not conscious or whatever it is, you go through kind of similar steps. First you have to see that something unusual is going on, and then you have to decide that it's, not just wrong, but also that help is needed. And this is probably the key part, that you think that you have a responsibility to help. And, I put nearly always yes here because like I can't even picture being in a situation where somebody, was injured or something and just continuing on. Like I don't understand how we do not have all share kind of a social responsibility to take care of each other. If you can see that on step two that something is wrong and help is needed, then you have a responsibility to help. I don't understand how that could not be the case. Um, so, and then there's step four. You know what to do. And I think that that is sometimes what holds people back from giving help, is that they don't quite know what to do. And I will say that 9 times out of 10, doing something is better than doing nothing at all. Maybe even, 19 times out of 20. So, definitely help if you can. All right. uh Different topic entirely. Again, there's a lot more information on this in your book. So don't forget that. But I really wanted to talk about a couple of things here. So one, with attraction, the you need kind of two things. You need to be around somebody. You can't fall for them unless you're around them. And then there's a hypothesis around matching, that people seek to match themselves with others based on, their similarity on these factors. But I just want to point out that this is a major cognitive error, right? So when you do this, you seek somebody who is, as attractive as you, and kind of like, they're as popular as you, and they have kind of the same outlook on life as you. It's very, very limiting about who you can match yourself with, and you're going to miss a lot of good matches, right? So this is like totally why Love is Blind exists. If you don't know what Love is Blind is, you can look for a trailer on Netflix. But it is not the first and will not be the last to use this idea, this problem, as fodder for entertainment, right? So, basically the bottom line behind Love is Blind is that people are dating without being able to see each other. They're talking through a wall and they don't know what each other looks like, and then they decide to get married or not get married. But the bottom line is, you're falling for somebody that you cannot see visually, right? And I want to point out that the interactions are just one-on-one, right? So you don't have any of the social cues of being in a group situation with these folks that you're forming connections with. So you don't have any of those other cues about this matching hypothesis. So anyway, this is a really good idea to try to put aside. So a lot of times folks who are able to kind of think outside the box that they had originally put themselves in have a better time finding somebody to match with. Okay. So, your book says that passionate love and companionate love are really like the two parts of a relationship, and I don't agree with that at all. I think that this framing does you a really major disservice because this framework by Dr. Campbell, you can Google it for more information, acknowledges something that is really, really important about relationships, which is most people do not understand that the power struggle phase is a natural point that relationships reach and is not necessarily an indication that the relationship should come to an end. So the power struggle phase is the part where, kind of the bloom is off the rose and you are arguing more, you're kind of butting heads more. It's more about, I kind of want to change you because like you're not putting on as much of a show for me, and so there are things about you that I don't like. So most relationships that end in this stage because it's hard. It's difficult. And a lot of people believe that like if you get to the part where there's a lot of conflicts and disagreements, that there's something wrong. And if you think that, then you are going to end up um, constantly disappointed. And people who get married in the honeymoon stage, which, for reference, the dating in the honeymoon stage can last for like a year, 2 years, 3 years. Like a lot of people get married in the honeymoon stage. And, if you believe that arguments and disagreements and stuff like that is, indicative that your relationship is in harm's way, just by default, then you are never going to have, you're never going to get to stability and commitment. You're never going to get to bliss with anybody because in order to get there, you have to go through the struggle stage. There's just no way around it. So, I find that people, are kind of shocked by this idea when they first encounter it. But when you look into it a little bit, when you Google it, like I suggest that you do here, you realize that actually it makes a lot of sense that this is kind of the stage of the relationship where you really start working things through. And it's not unfixable, right? Like it is just a phase and you get through it. Now, that being said, there are plenty of relationships that are just not functional, right? There are plenty of relationships where actually you are just deciding that you are not compatible, right? Like you learn things about people and you're beginning to learn in the power struggle phase that like you can't change people they can change themselves sometimes, but you're not going to change them. And so, this stage is all about kind of getting to the point where you understand that. And if you're not happy with who your partner is as a human being, just to start with, then you're not going to make it through the power struggle stage, and you shouldn't, right? That's a relationship that should come to an end. But, we should also just not assume that if you get to this point that your relationship is ending. It's not. It's just beginning. Okay. Now we're going to get into the hard stuff. So after this, you're going to watch a video on this topic. Um, you know, I I'm not sure that this part of the that this part really applies to the online version of this class. I'm still trying to decide about whether to make your final exam essay part, because your final exam has multiple choice and also an essay part. I'm trying to decide still whether to make it about this or not. I think I am, so it's still in here, but maybe it's not. So when you get to the end of the semester and you look at your final exam essay and you're like, this isn't about that, then don't worry about it. But I think that that's where we're going with this. In any case, the video is at the end. Okay, in groups and out groups. So in groups are the group that we're in. Okay, so that should be easy enough to remember. We put more cognitive effort into thinking about and interacting with the people in our in-group. Okay, we are more willing to accept individualization and differences, and just to kind of see that people are different and diverse than we are with people in the outgroup. We are not as good at evaluating the actual information in front of us. We're much more likely to rely on that peripheral root processing and stereotyping, and resulting in fast but not generally accurate judgments. And then we are ignoring relevant information because it's not consistent with our stereotype. So that leads to bias and prejudice and discrimination. And so what do all those words mean? So first, I want you to remember heuristic from chapter 8, okay? The heuristic is the mental shortcut or rule of thumb that simplifies problem solving, but it doesn't guarantee a correct solution. This is basically stereotyping, right? So these are like all heuristics except for discrimination, okay? Because these are all about beliefs. These are all about shortcuts to beliefs, okay? So social categorization is, kind of that first step that we take when we meet somebody new. It's based on how they present. There's nothing more in detail about it than that. They haven't even opened their mouth yet. We can't even put an accent here, right? So it's only about what they look like. So stereotypes are biases that we have about personality, ability, motives of an entire social group. And it's important to remember that they're not necessarily negative. Not all stereotypes are negative, so there's like a stereotype that all Asian people are good at math. That's not negative. Is it harmful? Yes. In many ways it is, but it's not in and of itself a negative stereotype, right? So it can be harmful without being insulting, right? If that makes sense at all. So a negative stereotype is a prejudice, okay? So this is a belief about a group that suggests that they deserve a lower social status. So you can see the difference, right, between stereotype and prejudice, right? So a prejudice is a stereotype, but not all stereotypes are prejudices, okay? And discrimination, finally, is an action that we take. This is the first thing on the slide that is actually something that we do. All right. And I just want to point out that all of these can be explicit. So this is something that you are aware of, that you're thinking about, that is in your head, that you can identify in a conscious way, or implicit, right? So You did the IATs, or, related uh, testing for when you did the checking your biases assignment. And that we talked about explicit and implicit biases at that time. And this is just more versions of where that comes from and what the details are about the definitions. Okay. So, prejudiced responses, right? So, like, the green path here represents a reduction in negatively biased or prejudiced responses. Okay, so the prejudice will still be there, but its impact will be reduced. So let's take a look at that. So there's a group membership queue that in the example it says Virginia interacts with a Black person. The assumption here is that she's white, while they both work on an intellectually challenging task. They get to the part where her stereotype is activated. Black people are not as intelligent as white people. And then the paths diverge, right? The green arrow goes off to the side here, and basically what it's giving is her thought process, which is slow down, be careful about where you're going with this. And then the prejudiced response, right, is the actual behavior is inhibited and replaced with low prejudiced response. So this is hard. Maybe we can figure it out together, as opposed to the first box under the red arrow. Well, second box, I suppose. The prejudiced response. This is a difficult task for people like you. Let me show you how to figure it out. So what that leads to is an awareness of the discrepancy, like, oh no, that was racist. That's not bad. That's bad. And then getting to the discrepancy associated consequences, right? Which are, at best, guilt and self-criticism, heightened self-focus, search for situational cues. What is left out here is, of course, the impact of saying that on the other person, right? So this process is about what's going on for Virginia, right? But obviously we also want to consider what's going on in the interaction in between them and what's going on for the other person as well. That's just not what is being examined by this example, which came directly from your book, by the way. So, yeah, the red path leads to a continuation of the prejudiced thought, which leads to a continuation of both unconscious and conscious discriminatory behavior, right? So, like, yeah, it has cognitive consequences, sure, but it also does absolutely nothing to change the behavior that Virginia would experience here, right? Or would act out here. Okay, so I just want to point this out. We all have biases and we all have prejudices. It does not matter what our conscious values are towards equality and equity. We all have these, all of us. So it's really not useful to feel guilty or to hand wring about what is basically just a psychological process, right? Like that's not helpful. Shame is not a helpful response in this situation. But what is helpful is to use the psychological processes that formed these situations in the first place and use those to create a situation where you're behaving in line with your values, right? So if you conceptualize yourself as a, not racist person, then great. You have to put your money where your mouth is, right? You got to act the way that your conscious thought wants you to act. Okay. And in order to do that, you have to follow this green path here. Okay. Social influence. So, social power is really the currency here. There are three ways to use social power, and there's three main consequences. One, conformity. So if you are engaging in activities because other people around you are engaging in those activities, um, our behaviors and our beliefs move towards that of the group. So it's very difficult to change your behavior and not change your beliefs to align. And, this depends a little bit on group size, on the cohesiveness of the group, on social support. Let me explain that one for a second. So, if you're in a group and you don't agree with the direction that the group is going, and there's somebody else who also doesn't agree, then you're more likely to be able to kind of push back, right? Culture. So this is really about if you come from a collectivistic culture or an individualistic culture. If you come from a collectivistic culture, you're more likely to want to conform. And then desire for personal control, which I think is probably self-explanatory. So compliance is agreeing to a direct request. So somebody says, hey, can you do this for me? And you say yes or no. Whereas obedience is complying to an order. Okay, so somebody says, you will do this. Instead of saying, excuse me, can I go ahead of you in the line? I have to, go pick up my kid from school. You say, move over. I'm going ahead of you in line. I have to pick up my kid from school. Okay. So you remember Stanley Milgram from week 1? We talked about why there are standards for how we can treat test subjects in psychological experiments. So the story of what Milgram did in his social psychology experiment that is most well known, and he did many versions of this experiment. It's not like it was just one, but he put folks in a situation where they felt like they believed that they were causing pain to somebody else. And the condition was that the experimenter who, was wearing a white coat and was, expressing a lot of authority, was telling them to continue, continue, continue. And the test subject had to decide whether they were going to continue causing this person pain, because they were being told to continue, or whether they were going to stand up to the authority and not continue. And, a surprisingly high number of people continued on just because that was what they were told to do. This is the I was just following orders argument. So there were some interesting factors here. The crucial factor in subjects who disobeyed was early and firm questioning of the authority. So if, the first time the subject called out and said, ow, that hurts, that they were like, hey, man, like I'm hurting them. I don't really want to do this anymore. Even if they continued past that point, those were the first people out, right? But the people who waited longer or whose objection was softer, they stuck in there longer. And so I think that there are some interesting things about this chart. This is specifically about Milgram's experiments. And, the first thing that I want to point out about this chart that I think is really interesting is the difference between ordinary person, that's the fourth line down, and, the experimenter. It doesn't actually give you the experimenter, but it's much, much higher for experimenter. Um, and the other one that I really think is important is participant with fully obedient Confederates. What that means is that the people around them were just doing what they were told. In 70% of those situations, they continued on. So if you're in a group situation and the people around you are just going along with it, then the chances that you're going to go along with it are really, really high, right? Really, really, really high. So, the flip side to that is that if you're in a room with people who are pushing back, then your chances of conforming are quite low, less than 10%. So this is a 60% difference. That's quite the effect. So I think that it's really important to think about the implications of this for social conformity in general and the effect, the kind of mob effect, if you will, right? The willingness of people to go along with what the group wants, right? Because participant with openly rebellious Confederates, the thing that they're going along with there is being rebellious. They're still going along. They're still conforming. They're just not conforming to the authority figure, right? Okay. So I told you that was a short one. The video here is an hour long. I recommend that you listen to it on 1.15 speed. You are advised to think about your notes for this lecture and to take your notes on the video with relation to what you just learned in this lecture and what you learned in the book. So there's a lot of concepts and ideas that use even the same language that we used while discussing this topic today. So I would take your notes in that way so that if there is an essay at the end of the semester, and there may be and there may not be, sorry about that. But if there is, that you're going to be able to pull out your notes from the video and pull out your notes from the lecture and be able to write about it. So yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate your participation in this course. This is our last lecture that I'm recording for this course. And I hope to see you in social work. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.